I've got to settle this with you once and for all. When you talk about the greatest basketball player ever, is it Michael Jordan, LeBron James, or do you put yourself above both of them?
You have to answer, you have to answer. I'll answer. The GOAT committee meets in secret, okay? So, that's just something we're not gonna know about, you know? But if LeBron breaks my record in this next year coming up, that will be one last record that I won't have to worry about ever again.
This wasn't harmless generational trash talk or another routine comparison between basketball eras. It became something much more personal, touching directly on respect, legacy, leadership, and the standard people should use when defining greatness. Kareem didn't soften his position or hide behind vague comments. He attacked the foundation of the argument surrounding LeBron's place in history, and the reaction afterward was vicious. The moment reportedly unfolded in early January 2025, when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the six-time MVP who owned the NBA's career scoring record for almost 40 years, sat down for what appeared likely to be an ordinary, relaxed interview. But once the conversation shifted toward LeBron, the mood reportedly changed immediately. Kareem's expression tightened, the room suddenly felt more serious, and it became obvious this wasn't going to end with a diplomatic answer. Then came his first major claim. The GOAT discussion itself had been manufactured by media coverage rather than created by some unquestionable basketball truth. The room went quiet. The interviewer tried steering the exchange into safer territory, but Kareem continued. His position was that LeBron's talent was obviously extraordinary, yet repeatedly declaring him the unquestioned greatest disrespected basketball history, minimized the people responsible for building the league, and ignored generations of stars who established their reputations without modern promotional machinery, constantly reinforcing their status. From that moment, the conversation became something completely different.
I think people will remark on the quality of his presence in 3 different cities and brought the championship each time. That's pretty impressive, and I think if that is his only legacy, it's extraordinary. But he's done a lot more than that, both on the court and off the court. And that's why I have a lot of respect for him, and the way that he's involved politically and socially, sending all those kids to school. He's an amazing individual, and I think Los Angeles is lucky to have him living among us. And
Kareem's comments spread almost immediately. Twitter filled with arguments, Instagram accounts clipped the interview, TikTok turned individual statements into viral debate material, and fans separated themselves into predictable camps. Suddenly, it was Kareem supporters against LeBron supporters, traditionalists against modern fans, and underneath all of that sat a much harder question: what should the word greatness actually represent? The important part is that the friction being described here wasn't presented as something that began overnight. Kareem and LeBron have been portrayed as having a complicated relationship for years, one containing admiration but also philosophical disagreements about basketball, leadership, social influence, and legacy. In 2018, when LeBron publicly discussed activism and the responsibility he believed came with his platform, Kareem, whose own involvement in social causes stretches back to the 1960s, pushed back on portions of that conversation and questioned whether the historical sacrifices behind that activism were being fully understood. Then there were basketball-related observations. Over the years, Kareem made remarks interpreted by some fans as criticism of stars changing teams, building super teams, and exercising enormous influence over roster construction. He didn't always attach LeBron's name directly to those criticisms, but people still connected the dots. The implication many heard was simple: earlier legends remained in one environment and built something rather than moving to situations they believed offered a better path toward championships. That underlying tension gained another layer in February 2023, when LeBron passed Kareem for the NBA's career scoring record. On paper, it was the perfect symbolic transition. Kareem had held the record for decades, LeBron finally moved past him, and the league had an opportunity for one iconic scorer to formally recognize another. Kareem walked onto the floor, embraced LeBron, and presented him with the basketball as cameras captured the scene from every direction. Visually, it appeared almost perfect. Yet viewers searching for evidence of tension studied every expression and every gesture. Kareem smiled, congratulated LeBron, praised his durability and sustained production, and acknowledged the significance of the accomplishment. What he did not do was use that moment to proclaim LeBron the greatest player ever, or claim that surpassing his scoring total placed LeBron above every legend before him. He recognized the record, respected the accomplishment, and allowed the evening to remain LeBron's. Still, people looking for friction interpreted the reserved nature of the exchange as evidence that something deeper remained unresolved. According to the narrative surrounding the January 2025 interview, that unresolved feeling supposedly resurfaced nearly 2 years later. Kareem's argument wasn't framed simply as criticism of one statistic or championship total. It was presented as a much wider attack on the way LeBron's historical case has been constructed. Kareem reportedly argued that sports media has always loved building dominant narratives around individual stars. Michael Jordan received that treatment during the 1990s, and in Kareem's view, LeBron became the next figure around whom a similar cultural machine was built. His broader point was that greatness cannot be reduced to enormous statistical totals or championships without examining the environment in which those achievements occurred. He emphasized influence on the sport, innovation, adversity, leadership, and how a player responds when circumstances become difficult. When LeBron's 4 championships, an extraordinarily complete all-around game, were brought into the discussion, Kareem's alleged response focused not merely on the number of titles, but on the path used to obtain them. He had 6 championships himself, but his challenge was essentially this: counting rings without analyzing context tells only part of the story. That led into the harsher leadership argument. Kareem reportedly drew a distinction between individual brilliance and leadership, suggesting that the strongest leaders overcome competition instead of repositioning themselves around it. That idea landed especially hard because critics immediately interpreted it as a direct shot at LeBron's moves from Cleveland to Miami, back to Cleveland, and eventually to Los Angeles, as well as his history of playing alongside other all-star caliber talent. Whether that interpretation was fair or exaggerated almost stopped mattering once social media grabbed it. To Kareem's supporters, he was exposing a legacy built partly through strategic career decisions. To LeBron's defenders, he was applying standards to a modern superstar that players from previous generations never had to navigate. Kareem then reportedly widened the criticism beyond LeBron personally and targeted the entire modern GOAT discussion. In his framing, ranking the greatest player had become less about basketball analysis and more about influence, visibility, fan bases, public relations, and control over a public narrative. His complaint was that celebrity culture had effectively merged with sports analysis until people could barely tell where one stopped and the other started. From there, the comparison became even sharper. Kareem reflected on becoming the NBA's career scoring leader in 1984 and suggested that his own achievement did not require an enormous prolonged celebration or a campaign built around individual attention. His recollection emphasized simply reaching the milestone, honoring those who came before him, continuing to play, and allowing the record to stand on the strength of the work itself. Fans immediately recognized the implied comparison with the elaborate spotlight surrounding LeBron's pursuit and eventual capture of the record. The suggestion, whether intended exactly that way or not, was that one era treated historic achievement with restraint, while another transformed those achievements into media spectacles. Then came the claim that shocked people even more. When forced to participate in a GOAT ranking, Kareem allegedly said LeBron would not make his personal top 3. His reasoning, according to the account, centered on complete careers, quality of competition, circumstances, and the way greatness was earned, rather than simply the final numbers attached to a resume. That was the moment the argument stopped feeling philosophical and started feeling like open warfare. Sports television quickly embraced it. Shows turned it into debate segments, social feeds became packed with clips and counter-arguments, and LeBron supporters immediately responded with the strongest parts of his case: elite production across an unprecedented span of seasons, the ability to function as scorer and playmaker at an extraordinary level, success across different teams and systems, playoff longevity and dominance through an era containing deeper global talent than any previous generation. Critics of Kareem accused him of resentment, jealousy, or simply failing to accept how basketball had evolved. One particularly aggressive argument suggested that LeBron had surpassed Kareem across the categories modern audiences care most about, and that Kareem struggled with losing his former place in the hierarchy. Kareem's defenders had their own counterattack. They argued that cross-era statistical comparisons ignored dramatically different working conditions. They pointed to modern travel, sports medicine, recovery science, player maintenance strategies, rule changes, and organizational resources unavailable to earlier generations. They also argued that physical defense was tolerated differently in previous eras and that stars like Kareem absorbed punishment night after night under conditions that would be handled differently today. Some supporters went even further, claiming the league and its commercial partners were eager to position another superstar as basketball's central global icon after Jordan's retirement, and that LeBron benefited from becoming the natural focus of that search. Others pushed back against attacking Kareem personally, saying that a player with his resume had earned the right to explain what greatness meant from his perspective. That disagreement exposed the generational fracture at the center of everything. Many older fans placed enormous value on organizational loyalty, continuity, enduring difficult years, and building championship teams over time. Younger fans who watched LeBron exercise player empowerment saw career movement differently. To them, choosing where to work, maximizing championship opportunities, and taking control of one's career weren't evidence of weakness. They were intelligent responses to a league in which franchises routinely trade players whenever doing so benefits the organization. That is why this argument became so difficult. Both sides could point toward legitimate context. Basketball television gradually turned the discussion into shouting contests, comment sections became increasingly hostile, and nuance disappeared almost immediately. If you want basketball analysis that separates the actual argument from all that noise, subscribe, because debates like this aren't disappearing. Even current players were portrayed as quietly choosing sides through social media activity, strategic likes, follows, and subtle public comments. What began as criticism from one legend had transformed into a larger argument about history, respect, player empowerment, career strategy, and the way one generation evaluates another. Then another part of the story attracted attention. LeBron initially offered no direct public response, no immediate tweet, no Instagram rant, no press conference confrontation. Because LeBron has frequently defended his accomplishments and openly discussed his place in basketball history, people interpreted the silence in every possible way. Some considered it restraint, others considered it anger. Others believed ignoring the conversation was itself a deliberate statement. According to the version of events circulating around the controversy, LeBron later posted a photograph connected to the night he broke the scoring record, accompanied by a brief message suggesting that authentic people understand and history can speak without explanation. There was reportedly no direct reference to Kareem, which only created more speculation about whether the post was intentional. Rumors attributed to people around LeBron's circle then suggested that avoiding a direct confrontation was strategic, rather than evidence that he didn't care. One teammate was even described as believing LeBron was irritated privately, though the public presentation remained controlled. If stories like this keep developing, subscribe and stay connected because each reaction adds another layer. The explanation offered by those close to LeBron was that he respected Kareem too much to turn the disagreement into an ugly public feud. That doesn't mean the criticism supposedly had no effect. Instead, people in LeBron's broader circle began responding indirectly. One longtime associate reportedly referenced the selective memory legends can sometimes have when discussing their own careers and warned against judging another player's resume as though anyone's history were completely spotless. That response instantly produced another debate. Was LeBron deliberately allowing friends to defend him while staying above the controversy? Was refusing to address Kareem directly a sign of maturity? Or was silence the most effective way to deny the criticism additional oxygen? Current players who entered the conversation did so cautiously. One common defense was that Kareem had every right to hold his opinion while LeBron's accomplishments remained strong enough to stand independently. Another remark suggested that previous generations sometimes fail to appreciate how dramatically basketball has changed. That argument only irritated traditionalists further. To Kareem's supporters, calling older legends disconnected from the present sounded like proof that modern basketball culture didn't sufficiently respect its own history. Meanwhile, LeBron continued playing, which caused fans to interpret every performance through the controversy. A dominant game became evidence that he was answering Kareem. A highlight became a statement. A frustrated expression became proof he was bothered. A calm interview became proof he didn't care. In reality, the answer was probably less dramatic than either extreme. A competitor can be annoyed by criticism and still refuse to build his daily life around it. But uncertainty is exactly what allows these stories to grow. That brings us to the bigger issue. Could criticism from Kareem actually damage LeBron's legacy? In the short term, certainly, because Kareem isn't an anonymous social media personality searching for engagement. He is one of basketball's most decorated players, a six-time MVP, a six-time NBA champion, and one of the defining figures in the sport's history. When someone with that resume questions the criteria used to elevate another superstar, people listen even when they strongly disagree. The challenge for LeBron is that parts of Kareem's alleged argument echo concerns some fans have expressed for years. Few serious observers deny LeBron's basketball greatness. The disagreement begins when people move from saying he is unquestionably one of the greatest players ever to declaring that one historical ranking is objectively settled. His team changes, superstar partnerships, influence on roster decisions, public messaging, and enormous cultural power all become evidence that supporters and critics interpret in completely opposite ways. One side sees a player intelligently maximizing a career and taking control of decisions organizations once made almost entirely for athletes. The other side sees a superstar creating conditions favorable enough to weaken comparisons with legends who spent more of their careers trying to overcome the same rivals rather than eventually joining forces with elite talent. Yet reverse the perspective again, and another problem appears. 20 years from now, how much of this particular controversy will anyone remember? Kareem himself went through decades of changing public interpretation. So did Jordan. So did nearly every superstar whose career became historical material. Drama tends to fade while accomplishments remain visible. LeBron's point totals, assists, playoff numbers, championships, finals appearances, all-NBA selections, and longevity will continue appearing in record books long after arguments surrounding an interview become forgotten internet archives. That is why legacy discussions are rarely settled in real time. Now consider Kareem's position. Could speaking this aggressively hurt how people remember him? Possibly. Anytime an older legend sharply criticizes a younger superstar, there is a risk that audiences interpret the criticism as bitterness rather than analysis. Sports history is filled with former champions whose reputations became more complicated because fans believed they spent too much time dismissing the generation that followed them. If Kareem's remarks are perceived mainly as resentment over losing the scoring record or receiving less attention in GOAT conversations, his argument loses credibility. But there is another way to interpret the same behavior. In an era dominated by rehearsed media appearances, brand protection, sponsorship obligations, and carefully managed public statements, blunt disagreement can feel unusual enough to be refreshing. Some fans would rather hear what a legend genuinely thinks than another generic response designed to offend nobody. Whether Kareem's position is persuasive or not, direct criticism resonates with people exhausted by polished corporate language. And that leads to perhaps the strongest philosophical point inside this entire argument. Maybe trying to identify one universal GOAT is flawed from the beginning. Basketball eras are not laboratory conditions. Jordan competed under different defensive rules, different spacing, different roster-building structures, and a different media environment. LeBron has operated in a pace and space era with enormous shooting range, globally sourced talent, modern training methods, dramatically different offensive principles, and athletes whose physical profiles have evolved with the sport. Kareem played a large portion of his career before the NBA even adopted the three-point line and competed in an era where interior play and physical contact looked completely different. Comparing those careers as though all three athletes participated under identical conditions is impossible. The equipment changed, training changed, officiating changed, travel changed, medicine changed, salaries changed, free agency changed, defensive rules changed, offensive geometry changed. Even what teams asked superstars to do changed. That doesn't make comparison meaningless, but it makes any claim of pure objectivity difficult to defend. Perhaps Kareem's deeper point is that greatness is better understood within eras than reduced to one final ranking. Maybe fans should recognize what each legend accomplished in the environment available to him, instead of forcing every career onto one artificial scale. There is only one problem with that solution. It isn't nearly as entertaining. Ranking players creates conflict. Conflict creates conversation. Conversation creates television segments, social engagement, podcasts, clips, reaction videos, and endless arguments. The GOAT discussion can be intellectually imperfect while remaining incredibly valuable as entertainment. In modern sports media, that distinction matters. Something doesn't have to be objectively solvable to become culturally irresistible. That is why the uncomfortable question raised by Kareem's criticism goes beyond LeBron. If the criticism resonates, does that mean basketball coverage over the last decade has placed too much emphasis on building individual legacy narratives? Have statistics, branding, championships, player empowerment, and social media influence been merged into one giant argument without enough context? But if Kareem's position fails to persuade people, and audiences see the remarks mainly as an older superstar resisting someone who surpassed one of his defining records, then why did the comments generate such an intense emotional response in the first place? The answer may be that fans aren't only defending basketball players, they are defending their own eras. Someone who grew up watching Kareem may hear criticism of the 1970s as criticism of the basketball that shaped their understanding of greatness. Someone who watched Jordan dominate the 1990s may treat any LeBron comparison as an attack on memories they consider untouchable. Someone who grew up with LeBron may see older-era criticism as another attempt to diminish achievements they watched unfold year after year. That emotional investment is why these debates almost never reach a conclusion. The argument changes as new players arrive, but the structure stays the same. One generation establishes a standard, another challenges it. The older generation points toward toughness, continuity, and accomplishments achieved under conditions the younger generation never experienced. The younger generation points toward deeper talent pools, strategic evolution, versatility, and standards their predecessors never had to meet. Neither side can recreate the other's environment, so nobody can produce the experiment that would finally settle the dispute. That is why Kareem's reported criticism mattered beyond one ranking. It challenged the framework fans use when discussing greatness. It forced people to ask whether numbers alone define superiority, whether championships require context, whether choosing teammates changes how leadership should be evaluated, whether longevity can compensate for differences in peak dominance, and whether influence outside the court belongs inside a basketball legacy discussion at all. Agree with Kareem or reject his argument completely, those questions don't disappear. If anything, LeBron's extraordinary career has made them harder because his resume is so unusual. He has played long enough to cross multiple basketball generations, accumulated statistics at a scale almost nobody imagined, won championships in different organizations, changed roles as his body aged, and remained central to the league's cultural conversation for more than 2 decades. Kareem's career presents a different kind of historical power: sustained scoring dominance, 6 MVP awards, championships across different stages of his career, the skyhook as one of basketball's most distinctive weapons, and longevity that once seemed nearly impossible to surpass. Jordan's argument brings another structure entirely, built around peak dominance, championships, scoring titles, defense, global cultural influence, and an aura created during an era when basketball exploded internationally. Those cases aren't identical, and forcing them into a single formula often reveals more about the person doing the ranking than about the players themselves. That's why this controversy remains compelling even if parts of the GOAT debate are manufactured. The argument may be impossible to resolve, but the emotions underneath it are absolutely authentic. Fans want their memories validated. Legends want their eras respected. Current stars want their accomplishments judged within the reality they actually faced rather than through nostalgia for conditions they never experienced. And media organizations know that putting those perspectives into direct conflict creates attention almost automatically. When basketball legends clash over history, someone will always believe something sacred has been disrespected. Eventually, the daily outrage disappears, news stories take over, and another superstar becomes the center of the sport. But the larger question remains, whose interpretation survives once first-hand memory turns into history? Kareem's criticism, at least as this story presents it, wasn't merely aimed at LeBron James. It questioned how basketball culture defines greatness, how much weight it gives statistics versus circumstances, how leadership should be judged, and whether modern legacy debates are legitimate analysis or entertainment products disguised as objective rankings. You can agree with Kareem, you can side completely with LeBron, you can still believe Jordan stands above both of them. But none of those positions erases the central issue. This conversation is nowhere near finished. If you want more direct basketball debates without the noise overwhelming the actual arguments, subscribe and stay with us, because stories like this keep evolving. Kareem may believe the GOAT discussion itself is largely artificial, yet the passion surrounding it couldn't be more genuine. As long as legends continue speaking candidly and generations of fans keep defending the players who defined basketball for them, this fight over history will continue. So if you stayed to the end, make your choice in the comments. Are you siding with Kareem or LeBron? And do you believe the GOAT debate is a manufactured media argument or a meaningful way to compare basketball greatness? Subscribe, because every new chapter gives both sides something else to fight over, and this argument still has plenty of life left in it.